a learning and talent role. So that was my background was that staying in that sort of role, and therefore I've done this myself as well. Saying that, I'm always keen to hear from people as to what they think is new in this area, because some of the things we'll touch on are things like the 9-box grid and stuff like that, which has been around for donkey's years. So having any ideas as to what people are doing that's different would be really interesting. If you're not familiar with the HR Uprising podcast, do please listen to that if you like podcasts. I'm just about to start a high performance HR series, so we're going to work quite hard on creating extra quality content there, which you might find of interest. So enough for me, let's get on to the learning outcomes. And as I say, do feel free to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're from, what sort of organisation, what interests you about this topic. Don't be shy. It's quite good if you do say hi in the chat, because also it allows you to interact further in terms of chatting with each other, and it just gets conversations going. It's a bit boring if you have to just listen to me relentlessly for the next 40 minutes or so. Thank you, Torve, for getting things off there. Absolutely. It's great to hear that. And you can see how different the businesses are already. Brilliant. Okay, so let's kick off. So what we're going to talk about is getting practical about talent management, how you might think about building a talent management strategy, thinking about talent 9-box grids, what the pros and cons of them, career pathways. That's something that seems to be really popular that people ask about as well. And I will explore that, whether one is more suitable for one size organisation or whether they sit together. And then just any other practical talent tools that you might want to consider using. Great, it's lovely to see you chatting away there and making connections in that chat. And do feel free to keep on chatting, introducing yourselves and asking questions there. Just briefly introducing Actus in case you are not familiar with us. So Actus offers a complete performance learning and learning management and suite. And we also do have our own talent management software and functionality within it, including a 9-box grid, which is relevant in terms of if you are trying to do something like a formal calibration. The other tools that we use, which is relevant to this, are things like 360-degree feedback, which can be a great tool for measuring or managing talent. So consider us if you're looking for something in those areas. So I'm going to kick off just to keep us getting warmed up with our interactions. Of course, you can have your lunch, but I'm still asking you to interact with me while we're going here. I'm just going to launch a quick question for you. If you were describing talent in your organisation, who would be considered talent? Is it a real select 5 or 10% based on performance, or based on your 9-box grid? Is it various pockets of people? Is it very skill aligned? So in your organisation, let's say you have really critical skills that people have to that maybe are scarce. So are they talent? Or is it very much about everybody identifying key skills and getting the most out of everybody, whatever their role and wherever they sit? What would you think in terms of this? Okay. Good to see you're on it. Brilliant there. I'll have a quick look through. Hi, Lloyd. Nice to have you with us. Lydia. Okay, so you're recruiting talent. Claire, lovely to see you. We've been chatting already. Really nice to have you. Oh, Donkey Sanctuary. Oh, Steve, nice to have you here. Oh, nice. Welcome, David and Torve. Thank you so much for chatting in. Do feel free to say hello, anyone else who wants to introduce themselves. Well, we've got 85% participation, which is pretty good, because that would also be a few of us from my team who won't have taken part. So let me share this. This is interesting to me, more from a point of view as I think this demonstrates progress, actually, because when I first started talking about talent management, I've been running webinars now for probably 4 or 5 years. There was very much more of it was quite selective. It was almost a little bit almost just leaving people out in terms of this. I've not got the right words, but it was something there which there was many more people would say it was elitist. That's the word I'm searching for. It felt a bit elitist, and now it looks like actually we're thinking about something which is more holistic for the whole organisation, which totally makes sense in my opinion. Now, I do understand also why you would have things where we have people with key skills and business need. That is something in a challenging environment, and if you're in a very competitive workplace, marketplace, so that can also be really relevant. Hello, Laura, nice to see you. Right, so that's just always interesting to see where it is. So most of us are going, it's actually about thinking about everybody here. And That's really good news. But there are challenges when we are using the term talent. And I throw this out in terms of it, if it is used in a niche way. But when you also explore it, sometimes you find that people don't always know what talent really is. Is it people having talents? So, as in, it's situational. Somebody might be talented in a certain situation, but not in another. Some organizations really haven't defined what they're looking for with talent, something that's good there in terms of the skills, in terms of great skills, and it may well move on. As I say, it can be elitist if it's used in very small niches, and whereas we're not really using that here. One of the other things I remember in the old school of talent management, and maybe we've got people here recruiting. Lydia's a recruitment manager. Is you can recruit in people who are high talent in one organisation, but actually they don't always come in and automatically become high performers in another organization. Correct me if I'm wrong, those of you, and I always in that area as well. So it is something where it can be situational, and just because someone's a high performer in some place and let's say they're headhunted and they're paid huge amounts, it doesn't always correlate that they come in and are high performers, which is an interesting one. And that's why I think that sometimes that can make organizations slightly lazy. Because we're kind of focusing on really small niches of people as opposed to this holistic view of how do we look at individuals and help every single person in our organization deliver their best, because that's how you drive a really high performing organization, making sure that everybody is seen for the talents that they can bring, and we manage to get our round pegs in round holes and square pegs in square holes, and we manage them really effectively and stretch them, and then that way effectively you're getting everyone as talent. And in my view, that is harder work from an organizational point of view, because you're getting line managers to effectively manage people and help to get the best out of every single person. So it's making sure that we're not just leaving it down to learning and organizational development to look after these little talent pools. It's about looking at everybody. There's loads of jargon I'm sure that you're all familiar with to do with talent management. And in fact, we have got a download that we'll send out when we send the slides out with you in case it's of use to you, which is called a succession planning jargon buster. It's quite a popular download that we do, and that goes into some of these areas. I know that I can see some of the people on here, there's lots of people who know as much as I do about this sort of thing, so it may not be so key, but actually it is something there that if you wanted to get sort of the 101 on this or to debrief it for someone else, you might find that useful. But I'm already using some of the jargon. Talent pools we'll talk about. We're going to talk about career pathways and some of the things that we can do to help bring people on within our organization. So if you're building a talent strategy, and actually anyone on here, I know I've got some pretty experienced people here. If you were building a talent management strategy, or have you built talent management strategies? And if so, how do you, what's the kind of key driver of it? And I'll go into what I recommend of it, but I'll be interested to know if you've built a talent management strategy or had to think about one, what's the overall driver, or how do you start with it? Let us know some of your examples, because I know that we've got people on here, for example, who are in recruitment. So you might have something there where you're recruiting for key skills. That could be about identifying key or in-demand skills and recruiting for or developing them. It could be that you're in an organization where you need to create a new performance or you make it more innovative or something like that. The main thing that I'm going to say here is that what you want to be thinking about is the overall purpose. Anything that's strategic, for us, we need to align it with the overall purpose of the business. So the sort of things that if you were thinking you've been tasked with a talent management strategy, this could be a subset of a organizational development strategy or an HR strategy, then think about why. For me, that's because that will actually help you align the style of operation within it, and also the sort of interventions that you're going to put in place. So potential drivers could be retention of key people or skills. So let's say you've got low engagement, or you've got a competitor that's poaching all your people. So you actually might be looking to put something in place that's going to retain your people. So that might be a combination of development, but also things like reward strategy. It might be that you're in a really competitive, highly fast changing marketplace. So AI, let's say, or something, software, something like that, which is just moving so quickly and you can't keep up with it. Therefore, actually, the most important thing there is developing people. And once you develop them and invested in that development, it's keeping them in the organization. So there might be something there. So development and retention of those key skills. Claire said aging workforce. Absolutely. So that's an interesting one. We had that when I worked at Siemens for sure, where you had legacy skills, which were potentially only really in the head of certain people. And you've got to make sure that you can transfer those skills, because although new skills are coming in, how do you either maintain or transfer that knowledge and skills within those people? Engagement, motivation. So, it's so much more expensive to recruit and develop people and onboard people, isn't it, than retaining existing talent. So that's a sensible one. Could be it's about employer brand. If you're in a marketplace where it is, you want to be seen as an employer of choice, again, that's about attracting talent, but therefore you attract talent through your employer brand and through the way in which people talk about the way they're developed and nurtured within your organization. You might look at creating a culture. If you're trying to deliver culture change, you could think about rewarding people or identifying people as high performers, those who are modeling the behaviors or the cultural values that you want to do more of, and helping those to go into more senior roles. And of course, high performance culture. It might be a combination of those, but it's always useful to think about what's most important for my organization, because by understanding what's important or what's a priority to your organization, that's going to help you think about what sits within your strategy. And following on for that, so as Claire's saying, they've got the succession planning in their areas, thinking about how do you define which roles to succession plan for? Because generally speaking, organizations don't succession plan for everybody. It's not necessarily practical, but they can sometimes overlook it. And I mean, when the organization I used to work in, they used to originally almost just succession plan for board roles. And then they realized that that was really risky. So a bit like the example here from Claire, where if you've got legacy skills, if someone leaves who's got all the knowledge, you're in big trouble. So it's thinking about which roles or positions are essential to business survival or delivering the strategy. And if that is a very narrow group of people, then you need to think about how can you transfer that knowledge. Same with specialized knowledge point there. Are there people who've got highly specialized knowledge or skills that are difficult or expensive to recruit into or replace? Yes, and the same in terms of equally hard to replace. So it makes sense to obviously think about the FD who's going to step into the FD, and often you do see that organizations have thought about successors into those key strategic roles or business leader roles, but don't overlook these other ones. Yes, Georgia, don't worry, you will definitely get a copy of the slides. So yeah, don't overlook those ones, and thinking about where we have specialist knowledge. And this also, I think, for me, is about thinking more widely. And when we asked that poll at the beginning, 80–90% of you are saying actually we are thinking of talent broadly. And that's why it's so important, because you want to retain as many people as possible and ensure that they are performing to an optimum level. So do think about those sort of technical skills in terms of your strategy if you're building it. And then if you want to bring it together, essentially, it's a simple 5-step model. So first of all, you need to think, what's that specific skill gap or areas of risk? And I recognize that some of you might have thought, 5 or 6 of those points, but maybe really focus the key area, because you can't do everything. So I think, what is the specific area that we want to address? And then you think, right, what are we going to be able to do to address this need in the short or medium term? And there might be multiple routes to doing that in terms of this. You need to understand what the skills and experience requirements are. And then you need to think about, is it something which needs to be recruited in? Is it about retention, or is it internal development, or is it a combination? And then you need to implement that and then put it in place. So it's just thinking, this is really common sense. I often think the 5-step pieces are common sense, but sometimes we don't think about it in as focused a way as this. And it's also, if you step by step something like this through, it's easier for you to get buy into it from the rest of your organization, because they get it. They get why you're doing it. It's clearly tied into business needs. And if you want to gain investment because you want to develop people in a certain way, then it's also something which is helpful. Remember, often in organizations, I don't know if you find this so much, but often people recognize that they want to go and recruit, and you think that recruitment, I know I've got lots of talent acquisition people out there, and feel free to jump on me. Um, but I mean, recruitment isn't the panacea, in my opinion. If you've got somebody who's a great cultural fit in the organization and you could develop them to have these skills and keep them, then that's surely a lower risk option. Plus, the bonus is you are investing in somebody within the organization. I mean, this is an aligned situation, but it's quite common for people to have to feel they have to leave an organization in order to get a pay rise or a career progression. And that is surely a very expensive way of managing people. And I think this is when we're thinking more holistically, more in the here and now. If we are putting things in place and people recognize that they are valued and they're going to be developed, then it's actually less expensive. But sometimes it's harder to get budget for internal development than it is to recruit people in. And that's where something like this, for me, helps you spell out why talent management, investment in talent management, is a really sensible thing to do. Yeah, so yes, sorry, so you're in that area. And it's interesting, bringing new people with fresh perspectives is great, but it's not the only way, is it? It's sometimes, because sometimes I've seen where organizations have gone, actually you just they don't look within. It's just almost a little bit lazy. Or they slightly discount or take for granted the people that have been there doing a steady job without necessarily stretching them. And that's where I've really like us to make sure that, we're challenging our line managers to ensure that we're also stretching, nurturing the people within the organization. So then if we go on to the good old 9-box grid, which I know a number of you are familiar with, and actually in the chat. So do you use 9-box grid for the whole organization? Is it something which is linked to reward? Who actively uses it? And I do think it's something, in my experience, is slightly, I don't know whether its main is just larger organizations. I feel that it's less popular than it used to be. And that's just maybe from the people that I'm working at the moment, but interested if any of you out there are actively using it. Whereas what I would say, I don't think career pathways were so clearly defined when I was in-house in a role, but I see that is something that is particularly important. But again, that might be more because I'm working more with SMEs and I was working more with enterprise previously. So I've tended to see 9-box grids in larger organizations. So you are using it, David, but it is complicated in an organization that isn't used to it. Yes, that's a very valid point, David. And actually, I'll explain that as we're going through it for those who, I'm going to assume that not everybody is completely familiar with it. So 9-box grid, fabulous HR jargon. I've got a screenshot, actually. This is a version that you can use in our software. So this is just a version that's set up. You could have a 25-box grid, to be honest. You can have a 3x1. There's lots of ways in which you can do it. But without judging whether this is good or bad, let's just explain what it's all about. So fundamentally, the idea is you are going to evaluate somebody's performance. And so you are going to look at how they are performing, presumably against either their job role or their performance objectives or targets. Now, of course, therein lies the challenge that David might be finding, because if you are in an organization where line managers are not adept at setting smart objectives, and they're even less adept at rating objectively, as in agreeing ratings in a fair and objective way, which is virtually impossible if you haven't got smart, as in specific objectives, then it's really going to be subjective measuring performance. And so that is a problem and the risk, as opposed to something that's a good idea. But if you are in an organization where you're able to do it, great, okay? And even if you've got a 5-point rating scale, so we do work with organizations, they might have a 5-point rating scale, 4-point rating scale, they would distribute where people sit within this box here to hit a 9-box grid, or we would help them to do that. And then the y-axis is about someone's potential. Now, this one for me has always been something I felt is slightly subjective, well, not slightly, very subjective, arguably, depending on how it's managed. So at the bottom is someone saying they've got low potential. And I think that this is where it's, again, it could be seen as something which is quite derogatory if it's not managed well. Reality is, if somebody is brand new into a role and they're just getting to grips with it, you could argue that they're low potential at that point in time. But as with these things, and probably it's one of the biggest arguments against 9-box grid, is you are pigeonholing people, you're boxing people. People don't like that. And it can seem a bit unfair. And someone go, who are you to say what my potential is? And I think that's where, if it's done in sort of a darkened room, people become suspicious. Yet if it's done transparently, people can get upset about it. So it is something that requires a relatively mature organisation to deliver it well. But the basic idea is that you're thinking about, in terms of potential, you're thinking about that person's potential to progress up the organisation. And I think if you don't, well, you're thinking about their potential to progress up the organisation right now. So regardless about whether you love it or hate it, or whether it fits or not, that's the principle of it. So you'd be able to distribute people. You would need to have usually done this at the end of a performance review, a performance management cycle. As I said, we should have rate. You're going to have to do ratings probably to give any level of objectivity. But if you have then got this, and you're somebody who is in the OD role or the talent management role, what you have potentially got here is what I would describe as talent pools. So this is how we use it in our system. So for example, if you've got somebody who's got high potential poor performance, well, actually, we'd probably be wanting to look at training or how we're managing those people. So actually, it may not be that you're going to invest lots of training in those, because you want them to be performing and understanding why they're not motivated, for argument's sake. Over to the level here where they've got medium potential and they're high performers, then we absolutely might want to be making sure that we are how do we optimize their potential, potentially get them into that top box. So they might need different levels of development or training. So you can use this for planning or grouping people with similar needs and aligning your development if you're in a role with that position. Obviously, someone with low potential, poor performance, assuming that it's they've not just moved into a role, you would probably be looking to be managing those, or performance management in the traditional sense of the word. Steve's saying you've used moderation with this sort of things and to others. Now, that I would agree, moderation or calibration. Sometimes people use this sort of thing for pay allocation. So we also have customers that do that. And I would highly recommend having some sort of moderation process where you can ensure that line managers are evaluating in a similar way. So it's not something you can jump in and do organisation wide without a level of development and making sure that everybody's looking at things in a similar way. So it's an interesting tool. It has its merits in that it really does highlight training and development needs. It can be helpful for your succession planning. It can help talent retention if you want to provide career pathways and use that as a follow-on from this, which is one of the things that I think. And it might help decision making if you want to think about promotions and performance management. It sort of simplifies it and segregates things. And so it can be useful if used carefully. Downside though, people hate being put in a box. You can be damned whether it's transparent or hidden. It is subjective unless you manage to get this moderation working really, really well. And there can be potential for bias, as I say, unless you've got the managers to be calibrated in terms of their different ways of managing people. People can be demotivated by being labelled in a certain way. It isn't suitable for all roles or organisations. And I think that to make it feel positive, ideally it needs to come, people need to see that there are talent and development opportunities that fall out of it for them to get real value. So my recommendation as to how 9-box grids can work best is if you're treating the boxes as talent pools, and then you're thinking about development needs that are really relevant to that group of people. If you make sure that multiples perspective, or you calibrate those ratings, ideally, and for me, in regard to potential, including the individual, I feel quite passionately that the individual is the best judge of their potential. And, because a lot of potential is about motivation. Has that person got a growth mindset and is ambitious? And having that judged by somebody without engaging with the individual, that doesn't sit well with me. So that would be something I believe is a good way of doing it. And make sure it's not something that stays forever. Same as succession plans, really. People do ebb and flow. So make it fluid, make it a guide for development as opposed to rigid boxes that people are stuck in for life. Because in actual fact, that could be an easy way to lose people as opposed to retain people. And potential, one of the things I've seen potential as being replaced by is aspiration/willingness to learn, which kind of links to that point before, is potential something that you can really quantify, and do we really know? I mean, is it a self-fulfilling prophecy, labeling someone with high or low potential? if you think about kids in schools and things, whereas actually someone's aspirations or their willingness to learn, that is more tangible. So that's something that I would consider if I was wanting to improve it. Let me send, don't worry, anyone who's got to drop off, we'll send you the recording. I'm just looking at the chats here, if there's anything there. Yeah, I'll go back and read on those. Some really helpful comments coming in here, how you're making it work, which is great. So I'll keep going, but do keep the comments because I think your experiences are really valuable. So then if we think, so talent management grid, as I say, it's nice to keep it fluid, but then there is a bit about what next with some of it. And that's for me is I think a career pathway, it may not suit every single role. It's not practical for every single role, but it can be a really great tool to use in certain parts of an organization. So if we link back to, I go back to my 9-box grid, and let's say you've got people who are steady performers. So you've got your sort of moderate potential, good performance. They're really say you want to keep those people. They're really valuable sort of workhorses, but they're maybe not setting the world on fire. They don't aspire to being the next leader or manager. How do you retain and engage and keep those guys, guys being those people, I'm not saying the men, how do you keep them involved and really achieving? And a career pathway can be a way of doing that. And we did use this when I was in-house. We identified that project managers was a really important role within this business, and we hadn't really done much with it. And so we identified career pathways because it was quite top heavy. There was one of those classic, dead men's shoes is the term that, there was no way for lots of people to get into the really senior roles. How do you keep people developing? They did the same for the finance group, or the commercials, they were called in this organization. And it really developed a lot of internal talent. So we developed these career pathways with aligned development. And I'll explain how that worked. So if you are thinking about doing something like this, though, do you need to think about what it is before you start? Because what you don't want to do is promise the world to every single person in, someone who comes in. I often used to see this with graduate programs, that maybe they join an organization and they think they're going to be the next MD, and then they're demotivated. So you need to use it to manage expectations, and you don't say that it's automatic that people progress up the pathway. They need to earn their way up it. Have a think about, do you want pathways for both line managers and individual contributors, or subject matter experts? And this is what we had done, because we'd found in the organisation I was in, there was reasonable development in place for people going through line management, but there were loads of people who were really valuable, going back to the whole thing of specialist knowledge or expertise that you need to retain, that they didn't want to be line managers. We all know that the best salesperson is rarely the best sales manager. The best engineer is rarely the best engineering manager. Often those skills are different. So you could think about a career pathway for somebody who is an individual contributor or a subject matter expert or specialist. The other way to think about it, is this pathway about promotion or development, or both? And I think there is potential to create almost an artificial status of promotion, which can be really useful for people feeling that sense of progression, and it's a useful retention tool. Then when you define your pathway, think about, what are the entry criteria? How do you evidence them? Again, is it performance? Is it competencies? Is it development opportunities or relevant experience? Do you get people to self-select, or do they need to be nominated? And then think about how you align all of these things together. So those are questions, but let me talk to you about the how you might do it in reality. This was based on actually a book called The Leadership Pipeline. I think you can still get it, but I thought it was a really useful book. It was about 4 years ago, about 20 years ago, showing my age, where we looked at this. And what the Leadership Pipeline explained was how people in line management roles basically have to take on different skills to get up an organization, and you can have blockers in the pipeline, which is fascinating. So the first biggest growth area is when you go from being an individual contributor or a team member and you take on a line manager role. And I see loads of this now because organizations are getting more flat, and it's a real challenge for lots of people because they don't know how to they don't know how to let go of the doing themselves, and they end up still doing their day job, and maybe not spending as much time on the line management or not feeling. And that's really, really hard when you've only got a couple of people. I think it's actually harder to be a line manager when you've got a team of less than 3 than it is when you've got 8 people. Because when you've got 8 people, you've really got to consciously switch to being team leader or line manager. When you've really got like 80% of your job is your day job, it's hard not to see the people management bit as being a bit of an add-on. So that can be challenged, but the main thing is this is a big change, is moving people to balance between task and people and to focus on being a line manager. And the skills that are involved in line management, which are different from doing something yourself in terms of that. Then that step up in, and this is obviously in a larger organization, you wouldn't have all of these stages in a smaller organization. But the next step from a team leader or initial line manager might be what you'd call a cost center manager. So that's where you're letting go of some of the responsibilities below and you're picking up the next level, and you start thinking more commercially often, not just about people. And then once you've achieved that bit, and if you're going up next, an organisation might be getting close to a director role, might be a functional manager. And this is more strategic. You're expected to look outwards more, maybe manage change and culture as well, more so. So depending on the size of the organisation, depends on how far up you get. But what is really, really important is helping people to understand the key requirements of the different levels. And the book talks about the fact that you get blockers by people who don't let go of previous sort of responsibilities. They're still stuck in team member examples. I mean, we had a classic example of a sales director that used to work in our organization. He was like he was up 4 levels. He had sales managers, etc. in there. But every now and then he'd jump in and get hands-on with a sales deal, which is all well and good. But what it did was it displaced he probably had the best intentions and he wanted to get the deal. But suddenly the team leader didn't know what was going on. The cost center manager, it displaced everybody else and confused people, which is really quite tricky. So Laura's, you're using the e-check. Yeah, that's great. Laura's saying it helps show the different requirements between line managers of 1 or 2 direct reports and those who are managing through managers. It really does, Laura. And actually, you've got quite a lot of player managers, haven't you, in the business school? So I think it is quite tricky for people to kind of get their head around with that. So then let's think about this. That's great for line managers, and most of us are creating a career pathway. You become a people manager, you're on the track, aren't you? But what about those people who are not people managers, where you haven't got the jobs, where someone's not leaving, or actually they don't have the people gene? This is another one of my bugbears. I hate it when we put people into roles and they just don't really want to do it, and they do a terrible job as a people manager, whereas they'd be absolutely amazing as a principal solutions architect or a principal lecturer or whatever it might be. So the idea of this is, how can you create, and it is to a certain extent, you're creating something, a career pathway for certain specialities. And this is a bit of an old, in fact, we used to have like company car thing. No one has a company car anymore. But all you're doing really is you're creating something, and you can even do this in an SME, right? So business our size, you can do this. And you can actually identify, someone goes from being a specialist, they achieve something here, they then go to, they might come as a starting point, they can then become a senior or whatever the language is. And then once they achieve something else, they become a professional. If you can afford it, you might increase the band, and not everyone does banding, but public sector do banding, holiday entitlement. You can align reward with this, but also you can align competencies. So people have to develop specific skills and meet those skills to get to that next level. So it's kind of an artificial career pathway, but if you're giving people reward and recognition, so you've got whether reward is financial, whether it's holiday, whether it's status in terms of terminology and skills, but you are giving people something to aspire to, which means you are developing them up the organization. And the very fact, if you think about engagement, I have opportunities to learn and grow, you're going to be more effective at retaining them in the organization. And then, of course, you need to think about how do you map, or you can think about how you map your development against it. Now, you could do the same. This is just for the leadership development one, but in the organisation I was in, we had an aligned development pathway for, as I say, project managers and commercial people. You can align relevant things. So think about what's the right course for somebody who's going to be a line manager. And in an ideal world, you might put that person who's an aspiring team leader on that course ahead of them becoming a team leader. So they get the opportunity to develop the skills. All too often people land in a team leader role, particularly that first line manager role, and they haven't got the skills. to do it, and then they get the training, or maybe they never get a chance to get the training. So training people up to be ready for it. You might even put them through an assessment centre as to whether they get the role, but getting them up there. Then once they're in that role, think about training for the next level. What you tend to find is when people have been around for a while and they've done lots of training, then that's where you want individualized development and training for more senior people. And that's where things like executive coaching, 360-degree feedback, which can be personalized and they get a coaching session with it. They could have a mentor or be a mentor, or just have specific masterclasses. So you can align your development plan with those people in this area. Now, of course, you can blend these together with your 9-box grid, or you can do one or other of these, but hopefully it helps you see how they can potentially add to your talent strategy, and have a logic to them. And that's the thing, if you pull them out like this, you can see the logic when you know why you're doing it and what you want to achieve. So that's bringing us towards a close in terms of wrapping this up here. So the takeaways I would just say here, for me, but I'll have a look in the chat as well, because there's some great chat. Key takeaways: be careful about the word talent. I think you all are. It is context specific, and it could be loaded if it's used narrowly. Decide what your organisation is trying to achieve from their talent strategy, and make sure everything aligns and it makes sense. Make an argument for it. 9-box grids and career pathways, they are subtly different options, not for everybody, but you can, as I can see, someone's got a 4-box grid, you can make it work for you, just thinking about the flow or the logic of it and how you can apply it. All of these tools are most powerful, in my view, and constructive when they're strongly linked to development, as opposed to being something which is a label on its own right. So that would be my take there. Okay, so hopefully that's of interest. Anyone's got any questions or comments, please do feel free to pop them into the chat. We'll send the slides out to you. We'll send the video recording out to you. We'll send the jargon buster, what is succession planning, out to you as well. So these will come automatically. Let me just tell you what's coming up for if you want to join us on any of the other webinars I'm doing. So actually, I've mentioned 360 feedback and talent management. Yes, sorry, that's today. So you've just done that one. But if you wanted to know more about 360 feedback, then I'll talk you through how to, as just a step where you could run 360 feedback in your business if you wanted to run it, because some people are scared of it, and actually it's really powerful. And then on the 29th of April, yeah, we've got a guest all about building a business case around culture. So if you want to develop your business culture, we've got Kathy Donaldson, who's going to do a guest webinar for us on the 29th of April. So don't miss that. She's great. Other resources, all of these will come out to you. Do look out for them. And I've got one more happening next week. Type Coach. I recently became accredited in Type Coach. It's a personality. It basically takes type personality accreditation to the next level, makes it applied. One of my arguments about it is that, say Myers-Briggs and things, which I do love, but loads of people go, oh, what is it? I've done that. What is it? What are the letters? This is a really, really pragmatic way of doing personality. It's a really smart tool, which is useful for salespeople, for influencing people, building relationships, team building. So I'm doing a taster session on that next Wednesday, and I think it's in the chat. If any of you want to sign up for any of the webinars, the 361 or the guest webinar or the taster session on Type Coach, just sign up using Eventbrite, the link there. So as is always the case, do connect with us. Also, if you haven't, please do follow Actus on LinkedIn, because we've just started doing a newsletter, which is fab. I don't think we can put the link here, but maybe we'll put it in. Oh, is it on here? So if you don't already follow us, yeah, just link on LinkedIn. And if you follow us, you see our newsletter, which is going to come out monthly. And what that does is it curates all of the content that we've done that month. And we usually do quite a lot. So you'll be able to find it all in one place. So I highly recommend that you do that if you're not already. Thank you so much for joining. If anyone's got any questions or comments, I'm very grateful to have them. Oh, thank you. And I said the Type Coach team said it's in January. Hannah, can you check on the link? We'll make sure the correct link. Splendiferous, I love that. If you we'll make sure the correct link comes out to you on the email, which will follow up. And thank you for flagging that, Ellen. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.